Good morning. So just before the service began, when myself and the worship team, we were meeting together, they were worried about one particular song that had the word Babel in it. And how do you pronounce it? Do you pronounce it Babel or Babel? And they were going back and forth. And I pointed out, if you have half the congregation saying it's Babel, and you have half the congregation saying it's Babel, it will all sound like Babel, and you won't have to worry about that a bit. So our passage for this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 13 to 18. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more." As our Advent story has been told throughout the centuries, this particular episode of it is not really remembered all that well, or it's not taken into part. It doesn't feel very Christmassy. In fact, I struggled to come up with a particular depiction of it to show you, and what I was able to find was this 17th century painting by a Flemish Baroque artist named Peter Paul Rubens. This was the most tame that I can find, because anything else you could not put on a Christmas sweater or a Starbucks cup. The second Sunday of Advent's theme is peace, and often, this peace is thought to have been found in Bethlehem. But this peace in Bethlehem is actually very short-lived, and they have to go find peace elsewhere. Peace himself is chased out, and it must be found elsewhere. Whenever we are presented this Advent story, the way it is presented to us is that the story takes place over a few days, maybe a week, when in actuality it took place over several years. Often we hear that it's a silent night or that it was a clear midnight, when that was probably the last thing that it was. Kingsway, I earlier left for a few days to go visit an old friend of mine. And in those few days, you made a very important vote to sponsor a refugee family. And I had prepared this sermon beforehand, making the bet that you would say yes. And I am so proud and joyful over that. And so it's my pleasure to sort of give this sermon now to sort of prepare you for what you'll be having coming up in this new year. And what I hope to convince you of and exhort you to do is to rely on the power of this gospel of peace, this Christmas message, which addresses both this refugee crisis that we've heard about in the news, and yet a second refugee crisis as well, which I'll address toward the end, which is the cause, really, and the result of all these political and war upheavals in the world. But in order to bring this story in the Gospel of Matthew into some perspective for us, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to give you a brief history lesson. Because when this character, King Herod, shows up in the Gospel of Matthew, he's brought there as if you assume that you know who he is and why he's there. Because the first readers of this gospel know why he's there, and they know who he is, and they know what he's doing. We do not. We don't really know who he is. We do not know why he's there. We do not know why he is so concerned. We do not know what kind of person that he is. He's just a character, and it's assumed that we know who he is. So what I'm going to give now is a sort of brief history update to sort of give you a sense of who this King Herod is and why he is where he is and why he is so fearful about a little baby. The contest for power among the divisions of Judean society has its roots almost 100 years before our story in the gospel. So this story that we've read here has its roots long ago, about 100 years before it, in an event known as the Maccabean Revolt. And while this ancient land of Judea was home to a very proud people for millennia, this time it was under another occupation. It was under another empire called the Seleucid dynasty in the province of Syria. Israel used to be part of Syria. But under the rule of this man, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who attempted to bring enlightened Western civilization, Greek democracy, to these ancient Middle Eastern people, the Judean people, reluctant to change with the times, stuck to their violent religion, and they crowded around a leader, a guy named Judas Maccabeus. Maccabeus is a nickname meaning the hammer. He's Judas the Hammer. And they crowd around this guy because he initiates guerrilla warfare. He says, enough of this, we're going to kick these guys out. And the revolt is successful. This is where we get the holiday Hanukkah from. The Hanukkah story has its roots in this revolt. And for the first time in centuries, since Babylon had come a few hundred years earlier, the Judean people finally have their independent and sovereign rule of their country again. It's theirs again. It's their land. And this dynasty is called the Hasmonean dynasty. However, after about 100 years of this peace, of this independence, of this self-rule, we have a Roman military leader, this guy, Pompey the Great. And in an attempt to make this land a part of the Roman Empire along with the rest of the East, he conquers this whole region. And in 63 BCE, so about 60 years before our story, this 100 years of independence and peace comes to an end, and it's under the Roman Empire. 20 years after that, we have a man named Antipater the Idumean, who is Herod's father, and he is made the first ruler of Judea under the Roman Empire. And he has two sons. He has a son named Phasael and Herod. So he gets Herod to rule over the Galilee, and he gets his son Phasael to rule over Judea. But then the last political upheaval before we come to our story is 20 years after that, when we have an empire to the east, there we are, called Parthia. And Parthia comes and they kill Herod's brother, Phasael. And Herod flees to Rome, and he convinces Rome, I am the rightful king of this land. And Rome says, okay. And so he is proclaimed king of the Jews, and he is made rule over the area. But people do not trust Herod because he's not fully Jewish. He's half Jewish and he's half Greek. He has unethical marital arrangements, let's say. And so he grows very paranoid and fearful because he knows what happened to his brother just 20 years earlier, and he knows what kind of tumultuous region this is. Then we come to our story, and you get some wise guys from the east, possibly Parthenia, that come and tell him there's going to be a new king of the Jews born in Bethlehem. And Herod knows what this is all about. He grows fearful that what's going to happen to his brother just 20 years earlier is going to happen to him. And so he's got to stop whatever he can to make sure that he holds on to his reign. Herod is so paranoid, in fact, that toward the end of his life, he kills his wife and his own 2 sons because he fears that they're going to try to kill him and take his place. And so when we come to our story of Bethlehem and we think, oh, slaughtering a bunch of children, like that's crazy. But for 20 children for Herod is not anything compared to what he has to do in order to keep his position. So you see how power struggles, sectarian divisions, proxy wars, foreign influence, all this stuff, none of this is new in the history of humanity, and especially not for this region. But what must Joseph and his family do in response to this fearful, paranoid leader that wants to kill all these children to make sure he can keep his power? They have to flee and seek refuge. We could read this story year after year after year and never pick up on the fact that one of Jesus' first experiences was being a refugee. And furthermore, where are they going to seek refuge? Egypt. So imagine, for Jesus and his family, they leave their land of Israel, which is no longer their home, and they have to flee to make a new life in Egypt, the place where their ancestors were enslaved and where they had developed an entire celebration about how they left that place. And now they have to go back. Yeah, they found a refuge from a crazy king, but now they're in a situation with all its entirely own complications. Egypt is not a Jewish land. It's a pagan land. They do not respect the Torah or their dietary laws or whatever it may be. And it's immensely unfamiliar to them. They have to adjust to an entirely new way of life, and who knows how the host will react. So when we come to our current refugee crisis, you could see how Muslim families, Christian families who have to leave their homelands and they have to come to lands which have historically been Christian, have been other lands, not their lands. They are, if we're making an analogy between their story and the one in our gospel, they are Jesus and his family. And so the countries that they're going to, Canada, the United States, Germany, wherever it may be, are playing host. They're playing the role of Egypt in our story. But in order to understand this refugee crisis, you have to understand it in the same way that we just tried to understand our story in the gospel. You have to look at history. You have to look at how peoples have come to understand themselves and their identity and where their place is. And I fear that throughout a lot of our media and newspapers, the refugee crisis is almost described as like a weather event. Floods of people, swarms of migrants, as if the reason for it is that there was an earthquake or that there was a volcanic eruption or something of this kind. The language of, and now 25,000 migrants will be coming to Canada by the end of, this year or next year, serves almost the exact same purpose in our media as there will be a high of 10 degrees throughout southern Ontario. And that's frightening because this is not a weather event. This is not an event that doesn't have anything coming before it. It's not random. It has its own history. And so what I'm going to give you now is a little history lesson on why the refugee crisis is the way that it is. And what I hope that you'll find in it is to show just how similar it is to the story as we have it in our gospel, and to be able to understand and empathize and really understand what's going on from the perspective of our faith. So this Syrian civil war has its roots hundreds of years ago in the formation of what is called the Ottoman Empire in 1299. This is a map of the Ottoman Empire at the height of its reign, so how long it goes out for. And throughout its enormous reign, it goes from, North Africa, throughout much of Southeast Europe, all the way to sort of the Caspian Sea on the edge of Russia there. And the Ottoman Empire may properly be called the first sort of Islamic empire. It's the first time when Muslims and Arab people have their own state, their own independent civil state, like our Jewish people did when they established their Hasmonean dynasty. However, this Ottoman Empire made a fatal alliance in World War I with Germany. And the result of Germany's loss in World War I led to the Ottoman Empire's fall. It no longer ruled over the region that it had. And so what has to happen in the fallout of World War I is that the countries who, quote-unquote, won that war have to now figure out what to do with this vast area that this empire used to hold. And what we have in 1916 is what's called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And this agreement is made between Italy, Russia, the United Kingdom, and France. And they decide, okay, here are the areas that our particular agreement holders are going to rule over. So you have the yellow area, which is Russia. You have the green area, which is Italy. You have the blue area, which is the French, and the red area, which is the British area. And then the A and B is for independent rule, but influenced by these countries. And what you have here is a recipe for disaster. If you think keeping French and English in Canada, keeping Quebec to connect to the rest of this country is a difficult task, what you have now is dozens of languages, a dozen or so different religious communities, ethnicities, all just shoved into what are essentially arbitrary borders. They basically just drew lines on a map and said, this sounds good, how about this area? And did a doodle. And decided the fate for millions and millions of people. So what you have now is you have this area that wants the empire that it had, the Ottoman Empire. It wants to have its own self-governed rule that it has. But now it's been taken over by other countries and empires, in the same way that our Jewish people in our story were taken over by the Roman Empire. So you have a similar sort of thing happening. And what we know as the modern state of Syria is formed in 1924, after they gained independence from France. But of course, now that they got their independence, who's going to rule? Who is going to be our Judas Maccabeus? Who is going to be our guy that's going to hold our place in the world? And for Syria, in comes what's known as the Ba'ath Party. And the Ba'ath Party is a very interesting phenomenon. So what they essentially try to do is their campaign was, we're going to restore the Ottoman Empire. We're going to restore the unity that we had and that we lost not too long ago. Their motto was unity, liberty, and socialism. And we're going to have this area back. But it only had 2 areas of rule. It only got elected in 2 places. One place was Syria, and the other place was Iraq. And the Ba'ath Party takes control, and one of the members of the Ba'ath Party that took control was this guy. Go back. There you go. Hafez al-Assad. And so he takes control of the region for about 40 years, and he is fearful. He does everything that he can to make sure that he holds his position as long as he can hold it, because he knows just how tumultuous the region is. He knows just how crazy and quick turning and loose this power is. So he does everything that he can to make sure that he holds it all. So he becomes very, very much like a dictator, because he's fearful that he's going to be replaced. However, when he passes away, his third choice to take his place was his son, who is this guy, Bashar al-Assad. Now imagine being your father's son and being the third choice of your father to take over his job. So he takes reign with very little experience. In fact, he wanted to be a doctor. He had studied to be an eye doctor. But now he's put in this situation and he doesn't know what to do. So when other people say, listen, we need more freedom, we need more democracy, we can't have what your father had for 40 years of by himself taking control of everything, we want more freedom, the only way that he knows how to respond is what his father did: massacre the innocents. And here we're at today. And so what I hope you've seen through sort of this comparison is just how human all this stuff really is. It can get very complicated and lots of dates and names and maps and everything, but the world is very much the same as it's always been. Independence, foreign rulers, fearful leaders, massacring innocents, strive for unity and independence and a kind of utopia. None of it is new. So when as Jesus and his family had to become refugees in Egypt from their violent, paranoid ruler, so too these families are now leaving their homes to come to a place that doesn't share their culture and doesn't share their way of life, and it's going to come with all sorts of its own complications, as we're beginning to see in some countries where they're not sure quite what to do now that they've settled. And while the governments have to be very, quote unquote, prudent or careful or whatever it may be, the church throughout these countries that are receiving these refugees have just an amazing opportunity, an immense opportunity for growth. And I'm more excited than I've ever been for all of you to know what that period of growth is going to look like. Having grown up in a neighborhood that was predominantly Somalian and from other places in Eastern Europe or whatnot, and sort of knowing that from the beginning and not having the privilege of being ignorant of the rest of the world has been an immense blessing in my life. And it will be for this church as you continue to do missions elsewhere in the world, but as you now receive the world at your doorstep. And your mission, your goal in loving your neighbor and preaching the gospel, this stuff, it's known now. It's not optional anymore. It's not optional anymore. And your peace and refuge this Advent season will not be in the fact that you got all the food cooked right or that you got all the presents that you need to get or your decorations were really awesome, but that you yourselves have become a refuge for others, and that you yourselves will hopefully find your refuge for your souls in the baby refugee who is Jesus Christ. Now, I made an allusion at the beginning of my sermon, in the title, to a second refugee crisis. And I really believe, actually, that if it's the second one that's not addressed, that how you address the first one, this political crisis, it's not going to matter. Because now you've had this opportunity to have the neighbor with you, but what comes after they've been settled is a whole nother story. There is another mystery going on in the world. We understand full well how families that are in trouble and are being slaughtered are going to want to leave and go somewhere where they're not going to be. What we don't understand are the stories that we sometimes hear of people who leave Canada, the United States, Germany, UK to go fight in the Middle East. Why would they want to leave a country where they're relatively well off and secure? Where life is actually better for them? Why are they leaving there to sacrifice themselves in another part of the world, and for a cause which one that would seem apparent to anyone is very barbaric. Why are they giving up such a good life for this? There was an interview done with two European guys who, this paper called Blue-Eyed Jihadists, as to why they went over there. And these were some of the quotes from their interview. If you have a beard, if you do salat, which are Muslim prayers, you're considered a terrorist. The outside world doesn't understand us. They don't have our mentality. They do not know what we want. And on that note, they're absolutely right. Our wider culture doesn't have the spiritual capacity to understand why young men like this would want to leave relatively good lives to essentially go to their deaths for a cause like this. And what some have noted is that these fighters don't have a single profile. It's not like they're just all poor young men. Some are former criminals, sure, or former rappers. But some are grandparents and gifted students. But what the Christian church has always understood is that having a house and having food is not what our souls yearn for. It is necessary. I had a friend in Scotland who said, man does not live by bread alone, but it helps. But we understand that humanity does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And it's this meaning, purpose, spiritual fulfillment, having a sense of a mission in the world, being empowered, having a sense that you are connected to the living God, that makes these people join something which is so maybe apparent to us as barbaric, but to them, it's giving them the thing that the rest of their world tells them that they don't need. Tells them that you don't have a soul. You don't need religion. You don't need purpose or fulfillment. And so they see these guys who at least believe in something, and they're willing to give their all to it. One family from the United Kingdom put it this way. I think it's the next, yeah. None of us were forced against our will. Describing a land free from corruption and oppression of man-made law, in which a Muslim doesn't feel oppression when practicing their religion, in which a parent doesn't feel the worry of losing their child to the immorality of society. And suddenly, some of the parents in the room have recognized themselves. Right? They are very much worried about our society, which has rejected God and which has rejected any idea of, morality or right living. And they are continually worried about what's going to happen to their sons and daughters and what is happening to their idea of being able to worship God. And they have seen a group that at least pretends or says it does this for God, and they're like, well, I have to go with them. And they look for it in all the wrong places. See, you're going to have a whole generation of people, especially younger people, from other countries, and they look upon our secular society and it sees its emptiness for what it is. They see its corruption for what it is. And they don't know what to do about it, and they feel in a desperate situation. So even though they have food, and even though they have a house, and they may be in school, they are told, that there is no meaning or purpose in their lives, that they do not have any power, and they don't have any agency beyond what other people tell them is going to be their life pattern. They're not empowered by any sense of purpose or meaning or helping people or whatever. It's look out for self, and they recognize the bankruptcy of that. So that's the problem that they see, and this is one of the reasons why they go thinking, I'm going to find that with these guys. I mean, I know that from my own experience, even at work right now, there's a phrase that my coworkers use all the time, and we say it like in jest, but a lot of truth is said in jest, that I'm dead inside. I'm dying inside. And while you may not know any foreign fighters, you absolutely know people in your life who are very hungry for God. You know people who are spiritually despondent. They feel that they've been cut off from God, or that they can't be in a right relationship with them, and that as a result of not being in a relationship with God, every other relationship is out of whack, as Dave was saying earlier in his prayer. Students with no prospects for their labor, parents who in their home country were doctors and are here bus drivers, young women who walk around slightly uncovered and get raped, women who walk around covered and get assaulted for wearing that particular covering. Parents who spend their lives raising children, and then when the children leave, their center of life is lost because their life was built around their children, and now they don't know how to define themselves or their relationship. People being killed by officers of the law. People who see that and decide to take the law into their own hands. Media politicians telling poor people to be responsible with their money, but then spend billions of dollars on useless junk. All of this political upheavals or mumbo-jumbo creates this second refugee crisis of a loss of a center, of a loss of a spiritual center, of a right relationship with God. And this is what I'm hoping that churches do not miss out on, is what an incredible opportunity it is to preach the gospel in this situation and to bring people into relationship with God. Because if you miss that, then you will get people who have emigrated to whatever country, see its bankruptcy and go back. Or fight in other means, searching for anybody that tells them, I know how you can get in this right relationship, and then lead them into the kind of things that we see. What you must bring is the gospel for the outsider, not the mysticism for the adherent. You must trust in the power of this little baby boy Jesus, who was the refugee and understands their pain and knows that even people in the well-to-do societies know that they need the word of God in their lives. You're to trust in that and not maneuvers of how things have always gone in traditions or set ways. And the refuge that you must provide is a right and vibrant relationship with God, not the promise of a risk-free environment, which does not exist. And the meditation that I want to leave you with is something that Ellen actually used in her prayer, and I want to leave you with it. If you want to maybe close your eyes and either imagine someone who is a refugee that's seeking to come here, or someone who is spiritually despondent and does not have the refuge of God in their lives, and to think of them as I read out Psalm 142. And then when I finish, I'm going to ask the worship team to come back up so that we can continue to reflect upon the salvation that we found. So, yes, if you will, if you want to or you feel comfortable, close your eyes and to think of those people. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint, before him I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand, and no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry out to you, Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather about me because of your goodness to me.